Good evening. Let me welcome you. I'm Bruce Jenkins, the film video curator here at the Walker Arts Center. This is our first MacArthur Dialogue for the fall season, and it's also the very first time we've honored a nonfiction filmmaker with not only a dialogue evening such as this, but also a fairly full-scale retrospective. I just have to say at the beginning, we had just gotten back from the printers, these absolutely gorgeous brochures. They'll be at the back as you head out, so please take one. I think it's really the most complete material, back matter on Ken Burns' work, so I urge you, don't forget to pick one of these up at the end. Ken Burns, of course, is no ordinary documentary filmmaker. In slightly more than a decade, under the banner of his Florentine films, he has completely transformed our notion of nonfiction filmmaking, as well as given us, I think, a much deeper appreciation of our own culture. This series is as much to show that there is life after the Civil War, which was an extraordinary success, as there is extraordinary filmmaking before the Civil War. Those of you who were lucky enough to see on either PBS or occasionally in screening some of his earlier films know that Brooklyn Bridge, for example, is the finest film yet made on architecture. Huey Long is maybe the most memorable portrait of an American politician I know of, and certainly the liveliest narrative I've seen in many a year about a true American original. We have the good luck of having with us Ken, who has been traveling an extraordinary amount to complete work on a new film, which we conclude our series with, Empire of the Air, as well as to continue production on a long-awaited film on baseball, which I'm sure will be a complete knockout when it comes out. The final film of the season is Empire of the Air, and it's in about 3 weeks' time. It will be the first public screening of the film. We'll see a little piece of it tonight. I urge you to come, if you can, for as many of the sessions as you can make it to, because the films, even on 16 millimeter, are so much more interesting and engaging and visually rich than when they're regrettably packaged on television or video. Joining Ken tonight in this dialogue session is, I think, maybe the reigning new voice on American criticism. It's the man who took the mantle from Pauline Kael at the New Yorker, but has actually been writing for the New Yorker since 1984. Prior to that, he wrote for Sight and Sound, The Nation, The Atlantic, writes on books and on film, but currently is the film critic at New Yorker, Terrence Rafferty. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome together here for MacArthur Dialogue, Ken Burns and Terrence Rafferty.
Okay, well, I guess I'm going to start off. Oh, I should probably pull this a little closer. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today with Ken Burns, who is one of the finest documentary filmmakers, one of the finest filmmakers, period, in America. And I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes and probably embarrass Ken in some ways, but I want to, I think it's an amazing and sort of unremarked fact about this strange moment in American cinema that probably the only area of American cinema that's really healthy right now is the documentary film. God knows Hollywood movies aren't doing it. Even the independent films that we often look to for something more interesting than the standard Hollywood fare. But I've probably seen more good documentaries in the last 4 or 5 years from American filmmakers than any other kind of American movie. Ken's film The Civil War, which is sort of the showpiece of American documentary at this moment, but there have been films such as Bruce Weber's Let's Get Lost, Jenny Livingston's Paris is Burning, Errol Morris's Thin Blue Line, There's an extraordinary film by Barbara Koppel called American Dream, which I don't think even has a distributor yet. There's a wonderful picture by Alan Adelson and Catherine Taverna called Lodge Ghetto. Al Reinert's For All Mankind. I mean, this is a list of, 3/4 of the best American films of the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, something is going on here. I think one of the reasons why Ken's work is so extraordinary is that he sort of, to me, encompasses a lot of elements of the documentary tradition. Many of these other pictures are interesting in very formal ways, but Ken, I think, is sort of a documentary film traditionalist, which is to say a filmmaker in whose work the movie's subject is paramount, in which the artist's point of view isn't explicitly announced, and the movie's formal devices don't call attention to themselves. In films like the Civil War and the earlier films that will be shown in this retrospective, you'll see a variety of different sorts of documentary techniques, including ones that many other filmmakers these days tend to scorn, such as a scripted voiceover narration, talking heads, that is to say, interview people who are being interviewed and who are actually identified in the film. You don't have to guess who they are. One of the things I most appreciate about Ken Burns' movies is that not only will he identify them on screen, he'll then identify them again later on, acknowledging that you might have forgotten who they are. So you don't have to feel stupid, and nobody wants to feel stupid.
And we spend hours guessing at which point in the second time that you identify them we need to do it.
Right. And I found that you're invariably right. Just at the moment when I'm asking myself, God, who is that guy? There's the graphic, and I'm eternally grateful. But the pleasures of these films, and in the retrospective, and we'll have clips tonight from many of these, you'll see films from as far back as the early 80s, for the last 10 years or so. And you'll see, the things that you saw in the Civil War were there right from the beginning. I mean, in Brooklyn Bridge, and these pictures are not, sort of willfully eccentric, as, say, Errol Morris's documentaries are. They're not, personal essays in the way that some other documentary filmmakers are. They use all of the resources available in the service of the story and in the service of the real subjects of these pictures. And I think it's important to remember that the kinds of documentaries that Ken Burns makes are a particular kind of subspecies of the documentary form, and it's the historical documentary. And this has very different sorts of means and effects from movies that have, I don't know, more current sort of interests. I mean, current affairs, political sorts of documentaries. The historical documentary, as in movies like The Sorrow and the Pity or Shoah, these are always about sort of the continuity of things. I mean, they're about the persistence of the then in the now. I mean, they require a certain reverence. Reverence is maybe the wrong word, but certainly a respect for tradition and a desire to deepen our experience of the everyday and to complicate it, and to show us where we've been as a way of seeing where we are. And I guess I'd like to start off this conversation by a documentary filmmaker it's a weird occupation. It's a strange thing to have to put on your passport. And why documentaries? How did you get into this?
Well, it's funny. In some ways, Minneapolis is a key to it. I went to a college in 1971 called Hampshire College, fully intending, I thought, to become the next John Ford or, failing that, Howard Hawks. And I wanted to make films about America, stories about America that would be rich with music and sort of larger themes. I didn't want to be showy or flashy, and that's I wanted to have meaning and emotion in the films and have superb soundtracks. That was important. Scores. And I ran into a man who had just spent 20 years teaching at the University of Minnesota named Jerome Liebling, who is a social documentary photographer who eschewed any kind of flamboyance, again, in formalistic concerns, but was interested in proving to me right off the bat that there was as much drama in what was taking place, that is, in the real world, as there was in anything in the works of the imagination. And I was really almost naively won over to this point of view and combined it with a latent interest in history that had been there, had never been formally trained. All of my secondary education is with filmmaking and photography. But combine that to begin to make historical documentaries, invoking what Barbara Fields quoted as William Faulkner's dictum at the end of the Civil War, that history is not was, but is. The idea that there is nothing in the past that isn't really worth bringing back unless it's addressing the present, and that's what I found in all of these things. But the documentary question just evolved. We did cinema verite mostly at Hampshire, and somehow I moved into doing historical works. I made a film for Old Sturbridge Village, which is the sort of the colonial Williamsburg of New England, using diaries and using some voiceover narration, but mostly cinema verite and a combination of diaries. And the first thing out of Hampshire that I began was this Brooklyn Bridge, sort of inventing the wheel as we went along.
I mean, what did you find particularly satisfying about working in that way? I mean, did you experience a real sense of discovery when you started working on the historical material?
Yes, there is the sense of coming into at least to separate it, coming into an American mainstream represented by the historical subjects. That there was a resonance, there was a particularly emotional transformation that took place in me when considering these topics. This was not superficial history. This was sort of lifting up the rug of history, getting in, seeing the dirt, that something as magnificent as the Brooklyn Bridge could have been polluted and corrupted at times by Boss Tweed, and seeing that it was made all the more magnificent by that participation, that these objects in our present were rich with their past, literally, that it was possible to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge and sort of be bombarded not just with the particles of the present, but the particles of the past. And all of that was immensely satisfying. It also formally was a way to work without investing too much ego. I mean, it wasn't... I mean, I love Errol Morris's films, and I completely agree with you about where the documentary form is right now. Actually, in 1985, about the time my Huey Long came out, Vincent Canby wrote in the New York Times that, we are seeing the same predictable shit from Hollywood, but look at what the documentary crop has been from Huey Long on a kind of traditional form to Streetwise, which was almost a theatrical film, but still documentary, that the form was not this narrow, roll your eyes, educational broccoli, but in fact this wide area, and that maybe it's the feature film that somehow suggested us a great range of possibilities was quite narrow. There was a sense that I could invest this with the same honorable, which is a good 19th century word in not too fashionable use now, but a kind of an honorable way of returning to the subject, of not putting myself in and yet being as present as an artist, I hope, in the final project, in every frame, as something as sort of highfalutin and loud as Thin Blue Line is. It should be noted as a kind of parenthetical afterthought that the same man who edited Thin Blue Line edited the Civil War, Paul Barnes, and he came from Thin Blue Line and the sort of paranoid anxiety of that to this sort of, so this 3 years in the trenches with the Civil War.
I should say, when I say that you use every available resource of the documentary film, that's excluding recreations.
Yes.
And dramatizations.
Well, it's funny though that visually, because the soundtrack, I sort of have sneaked up on these supposed lines that one draws in the sand, and in terms of what is tolerable, what is too much, what is arty or whatever, because for the most part, the imagery is pristine. It's live cinematography taken at precisely the same moment that the battles took place 125 years later. Clouds, moons, old photographs, authentic paintings, and sort of talking heads discombobulated from their environment to speak, hopefully, knowingly, searchingly, emotionally about the subject. But the soundtrack has, since Brooklyn Bridge, as you know, been made up of a tapestry of voices that are some of the best performers interpreting this material, and it's sort of in that way that I get away with a lot of stuff. And weird ambient noise as well dropped in. Yes.
But why don't we take a look at one of the, the first film that drew people's attention to Ken Burns was an hour-long documentary on the Brooklyn Bridge, and the part that we're going to see. Would you like to set this up, Ken? No, I will set it up.
One thing before you set up Brooklyn Bridge, I have to set up the apparent and patently apparent absurdity of having a retrospective at age 38 of your work. Coming here, I can remember when I was making this film on the Brooklyn Bridge. I started working on it in 1977, which is 14 years ago. Can you imagine what I looked like 14 years ago? People said, this kid is trying to sell us the Brooklyn Bridge, and no one would give me any money, but there is some sort of satisfaction insofar as if you look at all the press about the Civil War, there is a sense that I was born yesterday and that the historical documentary film was born with the Civil War, none of which is true, and for me it was born more or less with Brooklyn Bridge.
Right. So I think it's time to take a look at Brooklyn Bridge. We have a short clip from it, and then we'll talk about it.
We were so poor in that day that when the guy who was doing the optical titles misspelled George O'Keeffe and then said it was our fault, we had to live with it. There are two F's in O'Keeffe.
Why did you, was the Brooklyn Bridge, this was your idea, was to do a film, or had someone suggested it to you?
In 1977, I read a book, a nonfiction story of the Brooklyn Bridge by David McCullough, called The Great Bridge, in which he seemed to be doing in this nonfiction form exactly what I was interested in exploring as a result of this Sturbridge Village experiment, which was a very strong sense of the past as animated by first-person voices, diaries, sort of expansive sense of the social fabric of the place, as well as the sort of the larger political with a small p kind of considerations. And indeed, McCullough, who's now a fairly regular feature on public television's first narration was for this film. And I had to really work on him to convince him to do that. It's interesting that the clip is really, the Brooklyn Bridge is divided into two halves. The first one is the story of how it's built, in which there are old photographs, sound effects, music, first-person quotes, and narration. And this second half, which is really a phenomenon of just this film and the Statue of Liberty film, which sort of considers a poetic and iconographic and a sort of secondary life of the bridge, culminating in what for me is a fairly important declaration of principles like Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton and Citizen Kane as they begin the chronicle and tack up their principles at the end of this film. The last word is by Arthur Miller, who I was meeting for the first time that day and who would go on to become a first-person voice of Boss Tweed in the film. But he said, the city is fundamentally a practical utilitarian invention, and suddenly you see this steel poetry sticking there, and it's a shock. It makes you wonder what else we could do. Roebling really aspired to do something gorgeous. I mean, he could have built another Manhattan Bridge, but he didn't. He really aspired to do something gorgeous. So it makes you think that maybe you too could add something that would last and be beautiful. And that, if you want a declaration of principle, is the idea that you could leave something that wouldn't necessarily have your name written all over it, and wouldn't necessarily be flamboyantly formalistic. That is, it could be a bridge that could get traffic back and forth between Brooklyn and Manhattan and yet do something more. And I think if you want a kind of very easy encapsulation of what I'm doing, is to try to make something that has a kind of practical utilitarian purpose. These are basically just educational documentaries. It's broccoli. But hopefully there's something about the sauce that makes it good tasting. Our president notwithstanding.
Yes, I remember the horror in school when you were being shown an educational film or a film strip, as it is sometimes referred to. Yeah. Actually, but Arthur Miller isn't precisely the last word in Brooklyn
No,
Bridge,
Bugs Bunny is.
Bugs Bunny is, yes.
That's right. After the
credits.
Bugs Bunny pays somebody to.
I mean, the reason why I chose this clip, and you know, and your films are fiendishly difficult to excerpt because, you know, there's such a rhythm and flow in them, and the idea is all sort of. I mean, it helps to have seen the whole construction sequence, for example. I mean, you've seen this bridge being built and going up, and you've witnessed the whole human drama of it. And then in the second half, I mean, the reason why I chose this excerpt was because it shows, I mean, the bridge as represented in as many different ways as one can imagine. I mean, you know, photographically, as it was many years ago.
It's still the most painted, photographed, written about man-made object in the world.
Right. And you know, I mean, this was the moment in the movie when I really felt the sort of accumulation of meanings that, I don't know, I mean, the next time you walk over the Brooklyn Bridge, you know, you're going to feel it. And
there's something going on when we talk about all these films that supposedly in documentary films, the word is the enemy of the picture. And that is just not the case in my thing. And when you say it's hard to excerpt, it's because these are rather driving narratives, almost wall-to-wall talk or wall-to-wall oral information, whereas so often a documentary film is really a sequence of images. It's also not political, because when you do find a documentary film which is sort of wall-to-wall talk, it's essentially plowing a very narrow furrow that we can loosely describe as being political, lacking any kind of formal glitz, which Errol brings so wonderfully to his films, and that kind of paranoid tension. He's basically in Thin Blue Line telling a kind of 60-minute story.
Right.
And that's too bad. What we look for in their other films, and what we sort of assume going in that documentaries don't have, is this ability to what I've been calling lately to triangulate. That is, I can know where you are, sir, the distance between me to you, if I know the distance between Terry to you. And this is triangulation, and we talk about the resonances that come out of the bombardment of different facts, whether it's on a visceral level of image and word, or it's really just two different meanings. I really believe that the documentary form, or at least the one that I'm exploring, has the possibility for as many layers of meaning and emotion to accrue as in any feature film. And that I go looking, exploring, becoming, as I've probably beat to death lately, this idea of being an emotional archaeologist, that history is not just dry dates and facts, but a kind of persistent looking for that resonance which sparks meaning, perhaps waiting throughout the construction to get to the point where someone after the fact is responding to this, or maybe for some people at that moment that Washington Roebling overcomes this physical limitation of the bends and creates it, or for many people when a Victorian housewife takes over and makes the bridge a reality. Many other points in the film in which that can happen.
Right, and that, I mean, that's what's so moving about it is sort of feeling as if you're seeing the whole process. I mean, obviously it's not the whole process. I mean, you're selective, but right. But it's a coherent narrative that that does, I think, deepen our appreciation of something that certainly if you live in New York, in a sense, I mean, every now and then you will look at the bridge and think, oh my God, it's so beautiful, but it is, as you say, and as Arthur Miller said, I mean, mostly utilitarian.
Right.
I mean, people actually use it, and
well, it becomes a great metaphor for the documentary film, because when we look at the history of documentary in this country, particularly, say, from Harvest of Shame on, documentaries have been not themselves. They have been what they have suggested, because Harvest of Shame is not a great documentary. It just happened to be politically correct in the best sense of the word at the time, motivating thought and action and kind of societal discourse, which is great and one of the functions that we acknowledge as a documentary. The art of the documentary is a little bit difficult to mine up. I mean, we when we say that, we say Nanook of the North, and you start there, and there's something about it, but even how many people have seen Nanook of the North, it just becomes a kind of buzzword. Then later on,
been staged anyway.
Is Errol Moore, is Thin Blue Line more the current event subject of Randall Adams being released, or is it the stylistic, just bravura performance of Errol Morris? I mean, somehow a real good discussion of the documentary, which I've yet to hear, involves the consideration of an aesthetic detached from whatever kind of political impact it's had. And the Civil War certainly had a tremendous political impact.
Right. But there are these sort of, shadings of the way in which one uses fact or nonfiction, let's say. The reason why I talked initially about historical documentaries being a particular kind of form is that, historical documentaries are as various as any other kind of form. I mean, people think of documentary as if they're all the same. Your films have virtually nothing in common with The Thin Blue Line, or even Paris is Burning, or
Ludge Ghetto.
Or Ludge Ghetto, for that
even though
matter.
it has first-person voices and
That's right.
archival
That's
stuff.
right. They're as various as as any kind of nonfiction writing is, as different, as criticism from biography or whatever.
But somehow we've lost a language of talking about it, or maybe we've never had it. We certainly developed a language of talking about cinema in the dramatic form.
Right.
But we've yet to develop it in a documentary form. And so the criticism, which has been sort of the principal agency for interpretation, is woefully lacking. I mean, you read the New York Times and Walter Goodman talks about the themes and has no idea what elements that you've brought to bear.
Right.
I mean, he gave us a perfectly great review for the Civil War. I mean, one that you live and breathe for, but he sort of chastised us for not listing the dozens of researchers. Well, my brother and the writer Jeff Ward and a couple of other people who were credited did all the research. It was that kind of ma and pa effort, and not the sort of ABC thing where you have 400 picture researchers.
Right. Well, I think we can just cite Walter Goodman as being unusually stupid in that respect, because I'm always very happy to bash other critics, and because it seems to me impossible to think of the Civil War, or to look at the Civil War or Brooklyn Bridge or any of the other films that we'll see excerpted tonight, and not think of them as being, in some sense, just handmade. And that's obviously a characteristic that you strive for.
Well, I take an immense satisfaction in having the films bypassed in a way each year, because they're not as loud as Thin Blue Line. because I know that at each cut, at each image, and I am unusually among documentary filmmakers the principal cinematographer on my films too. Every archival picture in my films I've photographed, and in some films like Brooklyn Bridge or Shakers or Huey, 99% of the live cinematography as well, just the interviews I've done, that this is a real you said handmade, but every cut is a decision, and I love the invisibility of my presence after the fact, because that's where there's no imposition. In fact, I would suggest, I don't want to beat Errol to death at all, because I really love his films, as diametrically opposed, is that the one thing in the way of Thin Blue Line is Errol Morris, only because of how loud his presence is. And too often I think that, and this is just purely subjective and personal point of view, what is mostly in the way of documentary filmmakers are themselves in the process of making it. I'm there. You're here tonight because you feel me in these films in every place. The emotion that you feel is the emotion that I felt and wish to transfer. So it's not that I'm not there, it's just a different kind of there.
Yeah, I mean, you feel a kind of intimacy in the discourse that, I mean, it's in some ways, it's more like, it's almost more like reading than it is like watching a film, and I don't mean to, sort of denigrate it.
I had this great letter from a woman after the Civil War. A lot of the PBS stations ran it the 5 nights that they originally did it, and then the next Sunday, as they're wont to do, replayed it, but the whole 11 and a half hours at once. And she looked at it and then went into her studio and listened to it the second time and wrote me this letter and sent me the painting that she painted in her studio, saying I got almost as much out of it listening to it as I did.
But I mean, it is in some ways so much like the pleasure of reading. I mean, that sort of, fullness of significance that, I mean, what do you think that's specifically filmic about it? I mean, why are you not a historian, a literary historian?
Well, I think that if I had been born in another generation, I think I probably would have evolved to becoming a historian, but a writer first. I would tell you that I was a writer, and that I just happened to have chosen historical subjects to write about. The word is not an enemy here. My principal collaborator over the last 8 or 9 years has been Jeff Ward, who is a distinguished historian who does not worry, nor do I tell him to worry about whether there's any images to fit what he's writing. So first of all, we go off and we develop a script sort of independent from the image collection, which is all my responsibility. And I'm getting it, not worrying there whether there's a scene that Jeff's written, so that what you have is a very complicated thing. I think that describing what the visual thing is about is harder to do, other than it is the subtle accretion of this huge body of information from subjects that are heretofore usually held at arm's length. Old photographs. We usually look at old photographs and we turn them, and we control the amount of time they're on. We feel a little bit of ambiguity about them, and I'm suggesting that they are as close as we'll ever get to that past. Perhaps even made a little bit closer if on the soundtrack you're hearing an authentic, or as best as I can do, authentic reading of a letter or a journal or a diary or a newspaper account, without the over-the-top kind of stuff you get in hackneyed things, war is hell. William Tecumseh Sherman in our film, Arthur Miller, never said war is hell. William Tecumseh Sherman never said war is hell. He said war is all hell, and we made sure that our narrator said war is all hell, William Tecumseh Sherman once said, and with that Amy marched through Georgia.
It was Arthur Miller who said war is hell.
Right. But we don't go over the top of those voices and try to look for a combination. But central to everything that I've done is an appreciation of the power, and this is all from Jerry Lieberman, the power of a single image to convince, whether it's live or whether it's archival, to convince, that you realize that it suggests a reality which is possibly as full as our present, And if indeed we're doing our job right, the themes and the stories, particularly the stories that we have initiated, are reminding us how much history, the stories of the past, describe us now. That is, speak to a present. Nostalgia is very easy to understand. Nostalgia is a love of a dead past. It's the antiquarian's involvement with something that cannot be had. It can be purchased, it can be traded and sold at auctions, but it cannot be had. The history is the present day consideration of what went before, not so that we can decide what went before, but so that we can tell ourselves in a gigantically precise mirror who we are right this moment. So the Civil War is about all of the things that we are now, just as the Brooklyn Bridge is as well.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point maybe we should take a look at yet another kind of film of Ken's, which is a biographical film. And we have a clip from Huey Long, which is a feature-length documentary on the life of one of the most astonishing political figures in American history.
Amen.
A populist, near demagogue. Oh, no, he was a demagogue. And
the Boris Yeltsin of Louisiana.
Exactly. So, what was it about Long that made you want to make?
I was just looking at that, and I was realizing that it's the fact that we often want to choose so simply a yes or no response, particularly in politics, particularly in history, particularly in documentary, and that he offered the clearest example of how it's impossible to choose. I mean, this film is made up of testimony from people who are rabidly opposed to Long. Harding Carter's mother says there wasn't a Saturday night when we didn't talk about killing Huey Long. This beautiful woman looks like Katharine Hepburn in a high-back chair sitting in the Garden District of Louisiana, and she means it. And by the end of the film, you're with her. You know why. You know why that is. And at the same time, Harold and Myrtle Bigler on the Atchafalaya River, who we, by the way, go back and see. Harold has died a year ago, but we see Myrtle every year. It's been, 7 or 8 years. We don't miss going to see Myrtle. Or Betty, for that matter. I mean, it's the fact that it's much more complicated is sort of what I'm saying. I realized here that this is a real classic example of the kind of emotion that can come out, the sympathy that we feel. It's just too easy to reduce things in the present political terms, in the past political terms, to ciphers, to this ability to make them so symbolic that they lose what's meaningful for us. Did you hear Ashokan Farewell? I could hear the buzz. I was in the middle, the last month of editing Huey Long, when I had already decided to do the Civil War, and one of the session musicians had sent me an album he and other members had done, relatively undistinguished album except for the fourth cut on the first side, which was Ashokan Farewell, and it just knocked my socks off. And I said that would be the theme for the Civil War, but I couldn't resist. I couldn't wait 5.5 years. I get mail from that. Whenever people see Huey Long, they go crazy because
Well, to me, I mean, it proves that you can use your own films as archival material.
Yes.
As well.
Do it all the time, musically especially.
That's right. And there are bits in the Brooklyn Bridge that turn up in Statue of Liberty.
There are. I think I was telling Terry on the phone the other night that somebody's going to end up doing a PhD of all the, like Faulknerian county denizens. The interrelationship between all these films would be a fun thing to unravel and trace, because I deliberately put in, that's my one loud or perhaps quiet fun, is interrelating all the films, and there's a reference at least to 2 or 3 other films in every film.
I mean, the reason why I chose that clip really was because of that, this particularly beautiful dissolves from the old photographs to the people the old people as they currently look, and and these are all people, or several of them at least, are people that we've seen before in the film.
Right.
And
those are all their baby pictures, basically.
Right. And, it's the only, in a way, it's the only showy effect.
I was just going to say that with the time lapse, the reading of the poetry by Hart Crane and the time lapse that accompanies that, and the dissolves are about as far out as I get. There's always, at least in 90% of the films, there's some form of time lapse. Sometimes, in the case of the Shaker film, it's a 2-minute, the light falling on a particular house. In the Brooklyn Bridge, in the Statue of Liberty, in Congress, it's a much more manic kind of sort of fun use of time lapse. In the Brooklyn Bridge, a full moon rises between the towers as Frank Sinatra sings.
Well, certainly, I mean, in the Hart Crane passage, I mean, it sort of matches the sort of manic overabundance of Crane's language.
Well, there's a great point.
That was the other reason why I chose that clip. I just wanted to make everybody listen to Hart Crane,
which is a great poem for one thing. We were doing time-lapse photography, and we had to do it by hand instead of getting what's called an intervalometer that allows you to do it. So it was very crude, and you can even see some flash frames there. But the sort of, I guess the randomness, the accidental quality of it is wonderful. And when night comes, he's finished a phrase, and then it comes up again. He says, "I think of cinemas," and it's one of these just great moments that when you're in the editing room and you're timing where it happens, then it's one of these great gifts.
Well, I mean, as disgracefully showy as it is, those dissolves, as disgracefully showy as they are, I mean, I really do think that they're beautiful because, also because of the passage that's being read in them, which is all about sort of unfulfilled hopes and this kind of, the passage is, the spoken passage is about the passage of time,
Yes.
and I don't know. These dissolves really seem to sort of crystallize for me something really important about historical documentaries, and about the kind of film that you do.
Yeah, it's one of my most favorite moments in the film is the use of that, and also the Hart Crane thing, because the one thing that's in a feature film, there is intention at the meeting, and more important, maybe not so much intention, but there's preconception at the meeting of every image and word, because the script is the god of the production. But here, and I just saw the Lodge Ghetto film recently that you like so much, there's a collection of imagery that's going on here, and there's a collection of words and talking heads and worries about structure that aren't decided in the beginning. And there's a kind of horse trading that goes on in the course of editing. So I've got, in Brooklyn Bridge, thinking back 12 years, I've got rolls sitting in the editing room that say time-lapse. I've got rolls that say live cinematography specific bridge, live cinematography night from New York, rolls that are just endless shots, 50, 60, 70 shots in a roll. And I'm faced, where am I going to put Jack Underacker's description of Hart Crane before, after we have his reading of it, and how do we get to it? I've got this picture of Hart Crane, and I've done this. I've panned from the bridge to his face a year ago, just when somebody handed me the photograph. And suddenly that all comes together, not that quickly. It's not a process of sort of almost immediate intention. It really, and I think one thing you have to understand about documentaries is how random it is, how much it is made in an editing room through trial and error. And most of what I do is wrong. 99% of what I do is wrong. It's the wrong choice. The only skill...
I didn't want to say that.
the one skill you can look to is the ability to realize it was wrong and try to find a solution.
But you edit. All your films are shot on 16 millimeter, and you do edit them. You
all
use
on
actually
film.
Physical strips of film.
Yes, we touch it, and
you touch the film.
I had a really great metaphor working, and
many don't.
A cosmological one, that a painter deals with pigments and color on quite a cellular level. That's what makes color, is cellular sort of interaction. And the paint gets on him or her and hands, and there's really a tactile relationship to the material. Film is a cosmology removed. It's molecular. You deal with the sensitivity of light and chemicals, and which we've really gone down to a less touchable sort of form. It's molecular. But you can still hold the product of this. You can cut it. You need to physically tape it. You put it around your neck. You hold it in your mouth. As you bring something else in, it can cut you.
Right.
And that happens. It just doesn't get on your clothes that way. Video, boo hiss, is the next removed cosmology. It's electronic. It's atomic. You don't ever touch it. You don't ever see it. You don't do anything to it. You see merely a shadow of it. You never have a sense of its-ness. And you don't get to cut it, and in fact the most difficult thing in video is one of the easiest things in film, which is when you have laid a sequence down and you say, oh, that shot's not on long enough, to add a little bit more, that much more film, which is 4 frames, which is 1/6 of a second. It's just you go do it. You do it and you adjust the soundtrack and you're there. Video, you have to lay everything back down again, go back to your rolls and add 4 more frames, and then you go, takes an hour, and then you go, ooh, didn't work. You know? And what happens is you begin to not make those close decisions. So it favors rapid cutting, and it favors the less precise use of the duration of an image, which is critical to this. That's the building block. A great man told me as an editing thing that a shot should last as long as it lasts. And in editing, you spend all your time worrying and wondering how long the shot should last. And it'll tell you. And you have to listen, and that's not always as easy as it sounds.
God, Zen editing.
Zen editing.
Yeah. But you obviously really feel like you need that kind of very physical, tactile.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And I'm sure the reason why I was asked to do this is I'm the last writer in America who actually writes longhand.
Yes.
It's not on the computer. But
Shelby Foote does too.
Well, good for him. But yeah. But so I guess the next picture I wanted to take a look at was another biographical film about Thomas Hart Benton, which when I was researching this, I have to admit, I left that until last because I've never been interested in Benton as an artist, and I was afraid I'd be bored. And in some ways, it was the greatest revelation to me of all of your pictures, because I was riveted for 90 minutes. And it's a fascinating picture of a very, very peculiar American artist. And it has this in common with Huey Long, in that they're both sort of unclassifiable figures. Figures that are not easily explained by left or right or modern or traditional or any of the categories, and therefore I think are unusually resonant.
Most of my film subjects have been in the 19th century, and the manipulation of the still photographic archive with first-person voices. I've become increasingly interested in biography as a way to give access not just to the person, and it's very important that they defy that kind of easy conceptualization, because in their difficulty, both these men pretend to be something they're not, and ultimately suffer the consequences of that inner lie, despite the fact that they make our world a lot more enjoyable, not just because of their bombast and their personality, but because of the confusion they cause in us, the yes and no that they hit simultaneously. But the 20th century subjects don't have Huey, Benton, and the Empire of the Air, which are biographies in the 20th century, don't have first-person voices. They often have a huge accompanying set of witnesses, talking heads, that do it. But mostly they're about this sort of untouchable contradictions that these people, and Benton really snuck up on me. Jeff Ward hated his work and didn't want to do it. He thought that would be bad. I said, I'm delighted you hate it. I had remembered his work as sort of being the image of manifest destiny in high school history textbooks. But it was the life that mattered. The life that mattered.
And I mean, he definitely is one of those figures that gathered a lot of contradictions and paradoxes.
Well,
I mean, you can't be interested in American history if you don't have a taste for the really weird.
Right.
You know? And actually, I mean, the clip we'll show from Thomas Hart Benton, I think, really illustrates
the really important American figures decay, have half-lives, and what they give off, that kind of radioactivity that they give off, transcends in the most direct way the merely sort of functional, historical, intellectual, didactic consideration of their lives. That is to say, we can be moved in the consideration of a lot more difficult subjects under the surface if we're willing to let them in. I mean, Thomas Hart Benton drives art critics crazy because he did his best work and then didn't, like Rothko or Jackson Pollock, have the courtesy of dying right away.
Right.
Instead lived another 45 years to see his art go way out of fashion, then come back up, go out of fashion, and at his end coming back up again. And so his life is the razor's edge that any artist runs, not only failing his own work, but failing himself internally. I couldn't believe that. I thought I was going to start off making a film about this grumpy, cantankerous personality, just as I thought I'd have the real Broderick Crawford. And indeed, in Huey, we had hoped to include parallel clips of all the King's men. But if you try to put all the King's Broderick Crawford next to Huey Long, he's diminished.
He's just not strange enough.
Yeah, the only person who survives is Robert Penn Warren throughout that film in his great animated rhetoric.
Anyway, let's take a look at the clip from Thomas Hart Benton.
The unidentified museum curator is my very good friend Henry Adams, who is the descendant of all the Adamses in this country, and who interested me in the story of Thomas Hart Benton. And you've seen him 5 or 6 times before this moment in a little bit closer views, clearly in front of a nude, which you have not seen another nude of Benton. So there's this sort of growing, wouldn't you say, anticipation of what it is that Henry is in front of. And then all of a sudden it turns out to be sitting in front of Persephone, just his hairline discreetly below the gist of the painting. And it's one of my favorite moments.
And you see the callousness of the filmmaker.
Yes.
He's just identified this man as a friend of yours, and you get a wonderful cheap laugh off of it.
That's right.
Well, documentaries can be fun too. So when you ask PBS for the funding for the 15-hour history of pornography,
the film actually begins with the F word that I thought for sure that they would be upset with, and they ran it. I guess this is how you can. If Errol Morris had it in Thin Blue Line, it would have been beeped out. But I could get away with it because it's just an educational documentary about a painter.
Have you ever had any trouble with PBS or with? I mean, documentary filmmakers have to, write incredibly long grant proposals to various agencies.
I haven't. It's mainly because on one level I am kind of in perfect sync with where I get most of my money, which is the National Endowment for the Humanities or the state agencies. It's just the thing that animates me in filmmaking is the thing that they're most anxious to get out in their public programs, which is a sense of history not being didactic.
Right.
And so there's a wonderful kind of correspondence there. But it isn't easy. I'm doing a history of baseball right now, and my proposal is 4 times longer than Civil War because I need to prove to the pedants that baseball is a legitimate form of historic expression, as the Civil War is more obviously. So
I used to sit on NEH panels
and
every now and then and plow through that crap.
They're pretty deadly.
Yeah.
These are not hugely big budgets, but they're bigger than most independent documentary filmmakers work with, and require the sort of the larger agency of public television in its connection not only with the National Endowment for the Humanities, but the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, private foundations of which your sponsor tonight, the MacArthur Foundation, was also one of mine, and I've been really great supporters of independent work for a long time. And also corporations, and in my case, the great glorious irony is that the underwriter for not only the Civil War, but Empire of the Air, the upcoming baseball, and several other projects I have going is the negative subject of Michael Moore's documentary, Roger and Me, which is General Motors, who, from my point of view, were unbelievable. They have a tremendous interest in history, have absolutely no interest in telling me how to make films. They have nothing. They don't come into the editing room. They don't have any say-so. They don't approve anything. I am not even required to show it to them up until 6 weeks before airtime to give them an opportunity to take their name off if they want, but not take their money back. It's an amazing thing, and they're great because they also put a lot of money into educational stuff. So schools get this series.
I guess that stuff just didn't quite make it into Roger.
It didn't make it into Roger and Me, and I had they of course, once Warner Brothers bought Roger and Me, the story was a David and Goliath sort of thing in the publicity that attended what is a very funny film. But it was really
and very much in your style.
Yeah, it was Warner Brothers fighting General Motors in this very interesting fashion through this vehicle of Michael Moore. And when I would get asked constantly, didn't they underwrite it because to counteract the publicity? No, because they had underwritten it 4 years before Michael Moore was even on the scene. And then I always added that if I had made it, I would call it Roger and I. and that would be my sort of didactic contribution to it.
Subject rather than object.
That's right.
Right. I mean, but is there ever any sort of self-censorship that goes on? I mean, projects that you feel like you would love to do, but you would just never be able to get funding for? Or,
It hasn't happened yet, though I say the closest would be this Empire of the Air, which is incredibly, especially in its denouement, critical of corporate America. I mean, I'm actually surprised that General Motors is still on the ride, because it is damning indictment of what corporations do to individuals in the 20th century. At the same time, our popular myth-making apparatuses like radio and television and film purport that the individual is the single most important thing. And we feel this to be true in our souls, and our writing and our criticism and our films and our documentaries seemingly reflect this, but in fact that the history of the 20th century is the subservience of the individual to the larger entities. For example, this film, Empire of the Air, tells the story of three individuals, Lee DeForest, Edwin Howard Armstrong, and David Sarnoff. You've probably heard of David Sarnoff. Edwin Howard Armstrong's name should be as well known as Thomas Edison's. And the reason why it's not, that is to say, his scientific contributions to radio are as great as Edison's is to the light bulb, and we use his inventions every day. The reason why he's not is a particularly dark 20th century fable, which is what drew me. But no, I have yet to feel restrained by the choice of subjects. I sort of feel that's sort of, again, what documentaries are. They're sort of controversial, political, big and little p, and that I'm not sort of interested in that because I think that those will all get made, and we can argue over Death of a Princess or the Palestinian thing that caused so much brouhaha, but that really these aren't very good films. They're interesting subjects, but they're not. They're a function of news. That's right, and they issue out of,
and they have that value of
tremendous
showing
value.
you what's going on and what it looks like. And what
but I'm almost perversely interested in. I'm planning to make a film on Lewis and Clark, which for all intents and purposes is a dull side, but it's one of the great stories that we have. And Thomas Jefferson, these are some of the subjects that do. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. There's sort of people that seem safely dead, but offer us, I heard these two kids talking, or somebody told me this story, two little girls, 2 or 3 years old, saying, now that the dinosaurs are safely dead, we can say that they are ugly. You know, it's really.
I've always said that about Lewis
best,
and Clark, though.
the best kind of sense of what history's about. It's being able to pursue the people who can't pursue you.
Do you want to violate chronology and show that bit from Empire of the Air, since you were
sure?
if talking about it?
Can you show Empire of the Air?
Yeah. We do have.
I think there may only be one projector able to.
Oh, he's probably not. Okay, we can't violate
we'll stick
chronology
to
because we only have one projector. Because you insist in working in 16.
Right.
So what? I mean, what was it like approaching the vast subject of the Civil War?
It was amazing. All of these other films really literally led to it. All of the films seem to suggest, and I come to my love of history completely naively. I mean, I get off on stories and they excite me. I am possessed, but I have very little training, so what seems obvious to most people, that the Civil War is the central event, had to really be impressed on me in a direct way, and it came
you just thought
through
it was real interesting.
All the others, exactly. It came through all the other subjects, and I mean, that's how we did it. And everybody said, don't do the whole thing. Just do, one aspect of it, and I just didn't want to have Black History Month or women in the war or what an interesting guy Abe Lincoln is or this battle. It seemed that all of the other films had kind of been patches in a quilt that could make up something that would be American history, and that the central patch, the largest patch, is the Civil War, and it was missing and needed to be done, and that is a really good way of understanding it. It's also a sense, too, that we're dealing with the closest we have to kind of an Homeric, operatic form here in television, as pernicious as the medium is in causing our history or historical amnesia, as responsible as it is for sort of forcing us to live only in the present. It does have this ability to combine and animate the past. Walt Whitman, after the Civil War, wrote this wonderful sentence. He said, "Future years will never know the seething hell and the black infernal background, the countless minor scenes and interiors of the Secession War, and it is best they should not. The real war will never get in the books." And 50,000 books later, it's true. There's something missing in every Civil War thing. You can read Lincoln, but you can't hear him or see him. You can see him in a picture book, but you can't hear him. And you don't know exactly how he said it. You can read a description of the battle from the aerial view or from an individual soldier and get an entirely different battle. But there was this possibility that the very agency which had delivered us away from a kind of vernacular of history, television, had the ability to, and film, had the ability to reclaim it, to put it back in this grand operatic or Homeric sense. I mean, this is the electronic campfire, but this is nevertheless a way in which the spear carrier has as many verses as the god. And that's an important aspect in the telling of history, and it's particularly important now in a modern age where we suffer all of this question about multiculturalism and the new social history, which tended to throw out the old stuff rather than find a way in which they can coexist. And strangely, in this essentially superficial mediums, superficial in terms of the amount of intellectual information you can communicate, they can coexist. That you can have the old history of the state, Abe Lincoln and the generals, versus Jeff Davis and his generals, alongside the whole new history that tells you that Harriet Beecher Stowe and Harriet Tubman and Louisa May Alcott and Clara Barton had something to do, that Frederick Douglass and anonymous black soldiers had something to do with this, that Sam Watkins and Elisha Hunt Rhodes had something to do with this, and that beyond that, their music, simply and authentically recreated, had something to do with it. And the most direct visual evidence that we have of that period, the photographs, not only have something to do with it, they can be opened up and be made to reveal a reality that, as Whitman said, never got in the books.
I mean, it was go ahead. I mean, it was a superbly documented war. I mean,
Yes.
photographically, and and when you work on 19th century subjects, you do have the great advantage of, the fact that people wrote letters then.
Yes.
And I mean, I wonder if films like yours will be possible.
Well,
the history of us, because
I must tell you,
do we write letters? Will our faxes appear on screen? I don't know.
my sense is that going at the current rate, no, but there's something really amazing about what the Civil War has done as a cultural phenomenon. The Civil War, the series, has done is that I've gotten thousands of letters from people, mostly women, who throughout, I'd say 60% women, who throughout the production said, I'm not interested in the Civil War, to which I would say, but I'm making it for you, not for that, demographically complete 45-year-old male who follows military history.
Civil War
but
buff.
I was a Civil War buff, a buckle collector who's interested in the regiments and has missed the story. I'm saying they'll come along with this, but I am making it for you. The same with baseball. I am making it for the person who is not a baseball fan. That it engendered so much great literature that I get still, it's now over 11 months since the series went off, and I get hundreds of letters a week, just written kind of to me, New Hampshire. And they come, and I got a letter the other day, which is very short, and I mentioned this to you, I haven't read it to you, but I would love, with your permission, to interrupt at this point, because it's to the point about whether down the line we'll be able to do this. My sense is that good history, or history itself, begets history. That is to say, this series provoked a response. The Civil War was the great traumatic event in our childhood, and as any psychiatrist knows, dealing on an individual, when that subconscious is roiled, you respond. The country was reminded of its collective traumatic experience. It's true whether you got off a boat from Haiti yesterday, or you came over on the Mayflower, or you founded this country 2,000 years ago. It's still the moment. I got this letter. And I've been carrying it around. Sullivan Ballou is here, and this letter is here. It says, Dear Sir, again I am watching the Civil War, enthralled, inspired, heartbroken. So much to think about, so much to feel. The eloquence of ordinary people resounds. It humbles me. Such dignity in the archival faces of my people, who were enslaved, but who never surrendered their souls to slavery. I hear the Southerners who not only kept my ancestors in bondage, but fought to the death to do so, and I hate them for that. Then the choir sings, do you want your freedom? A good question, for we are not yet truly free, none of us. To achieve that, white America must abandon its racial conceits, and I must abandon my hate. They must change, and I must forgive for us both to be free. Lincoln was right. Malice toward none, charity for all. So at the end, I wonder, does my white counterpart, hearing that choir, realize that the final question is meant for both of us? Do you want your freedom? I know what my answer is. I will wait for him. And that's representative. It's just amazing kind of thing. So I think that in some ways, there's the letters of the 90s that supposedly don't exist.
I mean, I can't imagine an artist getting a more satisfying response to
I was asked by TV Guide in July to write an article for them, in the front of the guide, about the response to the Civil War. And I decided I would just do it all in letters, that I would just segue between letters. So I went to the drawer, I picked out one letter of the alphabet, the G's, I think, which was a stack this thick, and in the first top 8 letters wrote the entire 1,000-word article for TV Guide, and just went, whoa. I mean, I've answered them all, and I've read them all, and I've filed them away, but I didn't realize that you could literally write a whole story for a national magazine from the first 8 letters of the one file chosen at random, because they all had this kind of poignant, I mean, even the negative ones have this sort of sense of being possessed by the negative force of memory, that memory that didn't produce Robert Penn Warren and Shelby Foote and Walker Percy and William Faulkner, but that produced the sort of love and resilience of the Southern Cross and the Dixie flag and the pernicious racism that still exists.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of what people are responded to in the Civil War, and the reason why we've gotten that incredible level of response is that, I mean, is that we do sense in watching it, you know, or at least I did. I mean, I don't know, there's almost a sort of, there's a real love for the documents.
Yes.
You know, and for the letters, I mean, the way, I mean, you often will use the same, hate to bring this down to the mundane technical level, semi-technical level, but I mean the same photograph over and over and over again, you know, but the resonances are different every time. I mean, you'll pan
That's
across
because
a
a
different
note,
layer.
it's very musical. That's because that
yeah.
note is a beautiful note, and it can come back and be sounded again in a different chord, and that's important. And remember, it goes back to the constant theme that's going on here, is that documentaries are usually the expression of an already arrived at end. Whether it's Errol or it's Harvest of Shame or whatever. And here you're saying that there's something more, that the content is the most important thing, period. The filmmaker, his manipulation, however artful I might get excited about, it's still secondary to the fact that this is about the Civil War. And I'd be just as happy to talk not about filmmaking, not about documentary films, but talk about the Civil War or the Brooklyn Bridge or the Shakers as any of them.
And you can get responses like that in which you can see that someone, you know, someone's emotions and someone's understanding of the world have been complicated and deepened.
Yes.
You know, and you know, and that's what everything should do, but certainly more
it's Arthur
documentaries
Miller again.
should.
You know, you want to leave something that does more than the sum of its parts. You know, you're a bridge. You're stone in compression and cables in tension, and yet it's the most gorgeous bridge I think that's ever been built. And we respond emotionally to anything. A log over a stream sets the heart aflutter. And yet there's something that went into this, and the meaning is compounded once you know how it was built, so that no longer is it just stone and compression, cables and tension, artfully done, a beacon to artists and writers and poets for a century, but something more, this fantastic history, so that it's been paid for in every joint.
Let's take a look at one perfectly formed part of the Civil War. We do have a clip from that, and I'm sure you've all seen it, but it's certainly worth seeing again.
There's always a sense when you see that all of this, particularly biography, but also the kind of pursuit of history, is this effort at self-discovery, however personal it might be. And there's always a question that's animated my larger work, as I've described it, as trying to answer a simple question: who are we as a people? Who are we Americans, and these bridge builders or religious sects or demagogic politicians or soldiers in the war? And then at an intensely personal level, this sense, who made that? Who am I? You know, that comes out of everything. And certainly, I mean, I can hear that every day, that letter. It doesn't lose it.
I mean, you still feel the same kind of relation. I mean, it's not finished work when
no, it's not. It's definitely
done,
not. And I remember, it's funny looking at it now, because the song is now so a part of me that I've lost in many ways the ability to separate what the piece of music means. But I do have recollections of filming many of the images, which is, of course, a very rote process months before the synthesis of the film began. And I remember being at the Library of Congress and filming the interior of an officer's tent, doing 2 or 3 shots and about to take it off the easel and put on another one, when I realized I could do another shot from the candle up to the wall, freeform rather than tilt or pan or zoom, that I could just go diagonally rather loosely. And at that time, I didn't know what that meant. Then this wonderful, almost ecstatic moment in editing when faced with, literally 150 hours worth of stills saying, what do you put for Sullivan Ballew's letter? To realize that when he's talking about the debt that he feels to the previous patriots of the revolution, those who have gone before us, that there's something in that image on the wall that suggests earlier battles, not the present one, and that suddenly that association could be made, however correct that is. That may just be a picture of him or his father or unrelated, but it became possible, and for me that's one of the most interesting moments in the film, and a really good access to the process, is to sit there with literally hours of inventory of images and say, what do you show? I have a picture of Sullivan Ballew, a rather crude lithograph, which I didn't show, because he becomes unimportant to the series of photographs of couples that make it much more to the point than having it interrupted by something as ordinary as the man who wrote the letter. I mean, it's really true. It doesn't need Sullivan Ballew there.
Yeah, you sense something, that's sort of mysterious and intuitive in the way those images are put together. I mean, a lot of people have used, still photographs in films before, but very few filmmakers get, do you get that sense of sort of caressing the image.
It also is. There's also another simple thing, is that I have a romantic interest, a sentimental interest, an emotional interest, which is usually counter to the documentary flow, and it's unabashed. I mean, that's an element of my life, and so that sentiment, that emotion, is a way of responding to materials. Hey, why don't we put pictures of couples here? Good idea, Ken. Where, which ones? Not this, at that, now the music's changing. Let's go back to the battle where this took place, the cannon out on Manassas, which we've seen at long generic shots. It's in fact the shot that's begun the entire film at the beginning of this episode, 99 minutes before. 20 minutes ago at Manassas, it's poised there as you're hearing about the battle, but now we can return to it and go into its particulars almost in a Blakean sense, that the universe could be found in not a grain of sand, but in a blade of grass, or a link of the chain, or in any man's picture. And I mean, this is the sort of the stuff that's
and
very
that's what
romantic.
Historical documentary at its best does. I mean, when you see the contemporary, the fresh footage, in this context, I don't know. Everything seems, the soil seems richer. It's, everything seems, all that history seems to have seeped into those images.
Well, it is my belief that these emotional connections, however they are, promoted by the filmmaker, promoted by the selection of the filmmaker, promoted by the intrinsic meaning in the material itself, becomes glue that makes those events stick. And that's all we want it to do. We don't want the fact to pass dry and brittle. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. You need to have the connection. And that's what this emotional archaeology is. Great second-rate man that exalts as a general, a man who went on to become the first imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. This is not a film that's just resorted to the Magnolia and Spanish moss kind of syndrome of the Civil War, but has for the first time promoted blacks as active, dedicated participants, that have brought in women as not passive bystanders, that has added a lot of things. So it's unsentimental in its historiography, though it steadfastly refuses to present anything but story as the fabric of the piece.
So you're trying to sort of pass off this radical notion that you can be lucid and complex and emotional at the same time? It won't wash, Burns.
That's it. That's it. Let's leave now. Somebody you got that down?
Well, do you want to show a bit of Empire?
Yeah, let me just show you a little bit of this.
And then we'll take some questions after.
This is the first answer print, which is sort of like showing your rough draft of the most recent film that I finished called Empire of the Air, which is a long, complicated story. Do you know Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, the Tom Stoppard play? That's Hamlet off stage. Everybody knows the golden age of radio and Amos and Andy, who's in this, and all of this sort of stuff. But I was interested in this backstage story of three very complicated men. Lee DeForest, who invents a thing called the vacuum tube, doesn't really understand it, probably pirated a lot of his previous inventions, is always one step away from the law, but yet if you read the history books, he's the father of radio. Edwin Howard Armstrong, who I told you before is a man of 4 or 5 seminal inventions that we use every day, every time we turn on a radio or television, get anything from satellite communication. And David Sarnoff was the brilliant marketer who saw the possibilities of these essentially hobbyist toys and transformed it into first the radio industry and then later helped to pioneer the television industry. These men would be great stories, and this would be a great story in and of itself if it wasn't for the essential tragedy that they spend nearly their entire lifetimes not enjoying the fruits of their labors, but warring with one another. And I've just taken a sort of an early battle about an hour into this film between DeForest has begun the longest patent suit in history against Armstrong, trying to get Armstrong's first great invention is called the regenerative circuit, which allows DeForest's the Audion tube. None of this technical information is interesting or necessary for you to understand. He just sues Armstrong, claiming that Armstrong's magnificent invention is really his all along in this monomaniacal way. And then Armstrong, who you've learned, has this love of heights. He's always promoting himself by climbing up towers. And it's sort of an amazing story, and I'll just let you look at it.
And we should all go home, too.
Yeah, it's really good.
Anyway, Ken, thanks a lot. It's been great fun for me, and thank all of you for coming.
I couldn't imagine better company.
Yeah.